Hello, and welcome to Week 5 announcements for History 122. So one thing that's good to look at is the upcoming schedule, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So this week is basically kind of a normal week, very similar to weeks 3 and 4, but next week, week 6, is a little different because that is the last week, and final exams are scheduled for Thursday of that week. Right, so this week you'll just have a quiz. It'll be due 11:59 p.m. Sunday, but then next week there's Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of class, and then the exam final is on Thursday, right? So that's going to kind of throw things off a little bit, and that's something the university decides when that exam is going to be. But you just want to keep that in mind when you're planning things, right? You don't want to say, oh, I'll just do the final exam on Sunday of next week, 11:59 p.m., because it won't be available on Sunday. It will only be available until Thursday, 11:59 p.m. So do keep that in mind. Now, in order to try and help people get ready and to maybe simplify things a little bit, I hope, in addition to the Week 6 study guide that you can find on the Week 6 folder, remember we're in Week 5, I'm just giving you a preview of what's to come in Week 6. In addition to the Week 6 study guide, which can be on the final, you will also find 2 terms lists. One is a list of terms that we've gone over through the, weeks 1 through 5 that is in the order in which they appeared. The other is them being in alphabetical order. And one thing I would encourage you to do is to copy and paste from the other study guides what you wrote for those particular terms, right, into those sheets. And ideally you would have it into whichever sheet you want to use. I recommend the alphabetical order one because it will be easier to utilize when you're actually taking the final exam. And so you copy and paste that material for the previous weeks into those terms, and then you have them all together. I eliminated some names, right? So that's one reason I wanted to give you another name. There's a few names that I wanted you to know for previous weeks that you don't need to know for the final. But just to keep in mind, right, the Week 6 final is a cumulative final. So material from any part of the exam or any part of the class can be on that final. And there is going to be a focus, though, on the names, right? I think people tend to be easier to remember. I want you especially to remember people. And if you have prepared those names, if you know who those people are and you have them, especially I think in alphabetical order, it's very helpful, then the final exam should be very easy because a large number of those, the points will come from just being able to remember who those people are that we've talked about before. So just keep that in mind. But Week 5, remember, is just a quiz, right? And you just want to use the Week 5 study guide. I'm just giving you a preview of what's going to happen in Week 6 because it's a short week. So the writing assignments, the old assignments, I apologize. I included a couple questions from the previous week's assignment. So my apologies for that. So that's all I have to say about the old assignments. The new assignments, they're both a little tricky, but I think are good to read and understand. One is by Vladimir Lenin, who basically is the one who launched the communist revolution in Russia, leading to eventually to the establishment of the Soviet Union. And one thing about him that's very important is that he has to try and figure out how he can believe in democracy and freedom, even though the communists, when they take over in Russia, are only a minority. Right, they're only a minority, even among the revolutionaries. And he has to, he wants to bring this revolution, bring all these changes, but he still wants to use the language of democracy and freedom. And I wants to understand how he tried to do that, because his ideas, I think, are still influential even to this day. And there's kind of a myth, I think, that, Lenin was basically a good guy, and then Stalin was a bad guy. And because Lenin died and Stalin was able to take over, then the Soviet Union went, in this kind of terrible direction. And I think when you look at Lenin's ideas, you can see there's serious problems with that Lenin wasn't that nice of a guy. But you'll see as you read through it. The other thing to read is Mein Kampf, right? And that is something that was written by Adolf Hitler. And when I talk about Hitler, sometimes people just are like, wow, he really thought these things? And it's like, yep. And so I think it's important to include something he actually wrote so you can see we're not just making this stuff up. And it's kind of shocking that he wrote and published this book. It's not like this was his diary. These are thoughts he shared publicly. And people didn't think that, as we'll see in this video, the lectures for this week, there were a lot of people who didn't think Hitler was serious about fighting a war. right, that he wouldn't actually try and expand and go to war. But he said quite frankly in his book that he would. And I mean, if people would have read his book, they would have had a better idea what was going on. So I'm not sure what's going on there. In any case, I want you to read his ideas. Just to get an idea that, yeah, he really thought this crazy stuff. I shouldn't say crazy. This evil stuff is a better word, I think. So, the quiz grades, a lot of people did very well in the quiz. Some people struggled. If you were in the struggling group, you just want to think, okay, why did I have a hard time in this quiz? What do I need to change so I can do better on week 5? And especially for the final, because the final is where you can really pull up your grade if you've been struggling. So you just want to reflect on that. The way you spend the next week and a half is really going to help determine what your final grade is going to be. So I really have to emphasize that. This is, if your grade's not, and I posted what your current grade is. It's in the post week 4 grading column. You can see your letter grade up there. If you have any questions about your grade, I'm happy to answer them. But this week is key, as well as the next week, right, on how you're going to do for your final grade. So just keep that in mind. If you're having a hard time, you got to change what you're doing, right? If you're not filling out those study guides and you're not sure why your grades are low, you need to fill out the study guides. If you're like, well, I just don't have that much time, you'll have to make time if you want to do well. Just this is your chance, opportunity to adapt and change and overcome the challenge. The quiz for this week is just a normal quiz, 30 questions, each worth 3 points. There's a few things I want to say about the upcoming videos. So there's 2 videos, Red Flag, which is about the establishment of communism in the Soviet Union, and Master Race, which is about Nazi ideology, that are there to be viewed. So they're from what's called the People's Century. These are pretty cheesy documentaries in many ways. They were made in the late 90s, but I think they're really good, right? And the reason is because they focus on everyday people. So they talk about these massive events and then how they impacted everyday people, right? So it's one thing for me to say, well, the Nazis were really terrible towards Jewish people, and this is how many Jewish people died, right? And I mean, that's important to know, but that doesn't have that much of an emotional impact because, like, I don't know what, for example, in the Holocaust, something like 6 to 7 million Jewish people died. That's a lot of people, but I have no concept what 6 million people is, to be frank. The number's too big. However, in these People's Century series, you have people, Jewish people actually experiencing and talking about what they went through, and I think that's just much more powerful. Now, one thing I have to stress, though, is that I do expect you to remember some of the names of these people. It's in the terms list, right? So I'll have a question like, okay, Isaac Hoffenstaffen, that's just a name I made up for just an example. What was his experience like, right? You'll need to know that. So just keep that in mind. If you're struggling with the names and terms, you really want to write down what these people are, who these people are, and you follow out the study guide, you know exactly what information I'm looking on for each person. But I do expect you to be able to remember those names for the test. Or rather, remember the tests are open note. You can be able to find them. So that's just something to emphasize. So in this upcoming week, we finish up Section 9. We talk about the establishment of the Soviet Union, for example, and the rise of communism. Section 10 is World War II. And so that will and we're going to get up through most of World War II, but not completely finish it. There's a few videos, though, that I need to talk about related to World War II that we'll look at. One is a video called Der Führer's Face. Führer means leader, and that was the title that Adolf Hitler had. And basically, this is what I call Nazi Donald. It is a video or a cartoon that Walt Disney made in, I believe, 1943, in which Donald Duck has a dream that he is a Nazi and has to live in Nazi Germany, or what they call Nazi land. And I think in many ways, it tells us a lot about what Americans understood this war to be about. And I also want to emphasize there's a problem in that the video is, of course, racist, which is unfortunate. And the reason I'm showing this to you is I want you to see that racism because it's important to understand what's going on in World War II. So when you watch that video, try and spot who it's racist against, right? So a lot of what I want people to understand is, what did Americans understand themselves as fighting for in World War II, but also what were some problems with our country? And I think this video shows that very, very well. Now, there's also another video that talks about the internment camps, and it features a man named George Takei being interviewed about the internment camps that Japanese Americans went through. Just so you know, George Takei played Sulu on Star Trek. And that's one reason I like to include him, because it's interesting, I think, to bring in this kind of pop culture figure to talk about how he was impacted by the internment camps of Japanese Americans and Japanese who were residents. The other video series that we're going to watch, the first part of it, is called Victory in the Pacific. This is one long documentary that has been split into parts, and it's talking about the war in the Pacific between specifically between the Americans and the Japanese. I think it's very important to understand this, and you may, when you look at this week and into the early next week, you may ask yourself, why are we doing so much with Japan? And the answer is, in terms of World War II, and the answer is a large part because of what we face in the world today, right? There's all these concerns about North Korea's nuclear weapons program with Iran's nuclear program. But of course, the first successful nuclear program was that of the United States. And we developed it in a large part and actually utilized it during World War II because of the war with Japan. So it's important to understand, why did Americans use the atomic bombs? How did that fit into its historical context? And what does the atomic bomb do? Right? What impact does it have? And why would we be so concerned with countries having atomic bombs? So this is a difficult week, I think. These are not fun videos, but I think it's important to understand them. So do give yourself some extra time to watch them. I don't recommend watching them right before going to bed because it make it difficult to sleep, because some of the stuff is rather depressing. All that being said, the password is Sulu, right? S-U-L-U, in honor of George Takei. And don't forget to send me that password by 11:59 p.m. Tuesday. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. And good luck.